The silent house. The delivery man's blood was still wet on the stone pathway when Elena realized the gates would never open for her. Not by her hand. Not ever. 13 hours earlier, that morning had begun like any other. Elena stood at the white quartz kitchen island, pouring hot water from a silver gooseneck kettle into a Chemex coffee maker. Her hand trembled slightly, causing a drop to splash onto the white stone. The sound of water hitting coffee grounds mixed with the low hum of the refrigerator. And she held her breath, listening. Always listening. Elias sat perfectly still in a black designer chair across from her, his gaze fixed on his iPad Pro. He didn't acknowledge her presence. The screen displayed a complex stock market graph in red, the colors reflecting off his face like a warning. The water droplet gleamed on the white surface, a single imperfection. Elena watched it from the corner of her eye, waiting for his reaction. When it came, it was barely perceptible, a slight downward tilt of his mouth. His eyes remained on the tablet, but his jaw tensed. Just for a moment. Just enough. Elena's shoulders contracted. She quickly reached for a white linen napkin and wiped the droplet away, then cleaned the entire slab twice. Her movements were frantic but quiet. The fabric made soft sounds against the stone, the only noise in the room besides the refrigerator's hum. When she finished, Elias returned to his tablet and tapped the screen once, sharply. He hadn't spoken a single word since she entered the kitchen. Elena slid a plate with a single croissant and a small bowl of fruit toward him, stopping the plate exactly 2 inches from his hand. She studied the geometry of the positioning, measuring the distance with her eyes. Waiting. "I hope," she whispered. "It's how you like it." Elias looked at the croissant, then slowly pushed the plate back toward her by half an inch. He picked up his black fountain pen and began writing in a leather journal, the scratch of pen on a paper the only acknowledgement he would give. Elena stood paralyzed. She looked at her own hands, which were still shaking. A small blue bruise marked her wrist, not from him, but from the door handle earlier when she'd been rushing to meet his silent schedule, his invisible requirements that somehow she always managed to violate. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the kitchen's perfect symmetry. Everything was in place. Everything except her. By 10 o'clock, Elena was in her small home office, searching for her car keys. She pulled out a lipstick from her large beige leather tote, then a wallet, then a handful of receipts, spreading them across the dark wooden desk. The desk lamp cast a pool of light, creating shadows in the corners where the wall met the floor. Her fingers caught on something hard, stitched into the inner lining of the bag. It was a small, square bump about the size of a coin. She frowned, curious, then suspicious. Using embroidery scissors from her desk drawer, she carefully snipped at the lining. An Apple AirTag fell onto the desk with a metallic clink, spinning on the dark wood. It had an E engraved on the back, the same font as Elias's custom stationery. Elena picked it up with trembling fingers. The tag was pristine, perfectly maintained. She realized she hadn't been out alone in weeks without him knowing exactly where she was. Every movement, tracked, every location, recorded, every attempt at autonomy, catalogued. The office door creaked open. Elena jumped, shoving the AirTag into her palm and closing her fist so hard her nails drew crescents into her skin. It was just the wind, but her heart hammered against her ribs for several minutes afterward. By 11:30, she had made the decision. She packed a small black carry-on suitcase in secret, hiding it under the bed. She would take it to the garage. She would leave. The thought was terrifying and perfect. Elena entered the concrete garage, walking swiftly toward her silver sedan. The harsh fluorescent overhead lighting made everything skeletal, all shadows and hard edges. The echo of her heels on concrete rang out like a countdown. Elias stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, leaning against her car door, blocking the driver's side. He held a garage remote in his hand. He was wearing a gray cashmere sweater, and there was a cold smile on his lips. "Going somewhere, Elena?" His voice was dangerously soft. Elena tried to push past him to get to the door. Elias grabbed her upper arm, his fingers digging into her skin through her thin coat. He spun her around toward the concrete wall with a violent precision that left her gasping. "Please," she said. But he didn't respond. Elias wrenched the car keys out of her hand. She clawed at his wrist, leaving red marks on his skin. He shoved her back against the side of the car, a heavy impact that made the metal groan and knocked the wind from her lungs. The small suitcase she had dropped clattered across the concrete floor. Elena swung her tote bag at his head. He ducked, caught the bag, and threw it across the garage. It slid across the grit, spilling its contents. He stepped into her personal space, his face inches from hers. He didn't hit her, but he pressed his forearm against her chest, pinning her to the car, his forearm a bar of iron against her collarbone. "You shouldn't leave," he whispered, his voice clinical and precise. "You're not well." Elias let go and walked to the main garage door control. He pressed a button. The heavy steel door rolled down with a deafening rattle, and Elena watched the bright line of daylight at the bottom disappearing inch by inch, until nothing remained but the harsh fluorescent light and the sound of a heavy click as the door locked. He pocketed the keys and walked back to the house door without looking back. 3 hours later, Elena was in the kitchen again. She tried to use her laptop, but the parental controls screen demanded a passcode she didn't have. The words on the display seemed to mock her. "Account restricted. Enter administrator PIN." Her phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from the Home Smart app appeared. "Movement detected in living room." Then another. "Internal security armed." She looked up and saw the red dot of an active security camera in the corner of the ceiling, blinking like a tiny, watchful eye. A text message appeared from Elias. "You have 10 minutes to finish the laundry before the guests arrive. I'm watching the clock." There were no guests coming. There had never been guests. But the instruction was clear, and the heavy brass pendulum clock on the wall began its rhythmic ticking. Elena rushed to the laundry room door. It was locked. An electronic keypad flickered green, then red. She pulled at the handle with both hands, but it wouldn't budge. Then a voice came through the wall-mounted intercom, mechanical and robotic. "Wrong door, Elena. Try the pantry first. Keep up." The intercom clicked off. Elena stood in the hallway, looking around the room. Every smart device in the house, the lights, the door locks, the oven, the televisions, was now controlled by him remotely. She was in a digital cage. The lights dimmed and brightened at his command. Red, locked icons appeared on a tablet screen she couldn't reach. The clicking of various smart locks engaging echoed throughout the house like a chorus of finality. She was not a person anymore. She was a system to be controlled. At 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Elena saw a man in a brown uniform standing at the glass front door through the hallway. He was holding a large cardboard box, checking his watch with the bored expression of someone who had 1,000 deliveries left to make. For a moment, just a moment, Elena saw a way out. She ran to the door, hands fumbling with the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. It was an electronic lock. She began pounding on the glass, her fists thudding against the heavy pane. "Help! Help me, please!" Her voice cracked on the second word. The delivery man leaned in to hear. His expression changed from boredom to confusion. He reached for his phone. Then the door clicked open. It wasn't Elena who had opened it. Elias was behind her, his hand on the master control panel, his face arranged in a mask of perfect politeness. Elena lunged for the opening, but Elias grabbed a heavy bronze sculpture from the side table, an abstract horse, and jammed the heavy base into the doorframe. Elena's hand caught between the door and the sculpture, pinned like a small animal in a trap. The pain was immediate and white-hot. She screamed, a sound she didn't recognize as her own. Elias kicked the cardboard box out of the delivery man's hands and stepped onto the porch. He grabbed the man's throat and shoved him off the porch onto the stone pathway. The man fell hard, his head hitting the edge of a planter with a sickening crack. Blood trickled onto the gray stone. "Wrong house," Elias said, his voice low and guttural. "Get out." The delivery man scrambled away, bleeding from the temple, his phone forgotten on the pavement. Elias pulled the sculpture out and slammed the door. He dragged Elena by the hair toward the back of the house. She was clutching her crushed hand to her chest, weeping without sound, her body limp as he pulled her across the hardwood floor. A trail of blonde hair fibers marked her path. That evening, Elena found herself locked in the dark basement storage room. She used the light from a small emergency flashlight to navigate the shadows. Behind a stack of unused chairs, she discovered gray metal filing cabinets, dusty and forgotten-looking. She pried the top drawer open with a screwdriver. Inside were manila folders, neatly organized and labeled in perfect cursive. Sarah, 2015. Maya, 2018. Lily, 2021. Each name, each year. A chronology of women. She opened Lily, 2021. Inside were hundreds of photographs. Lily eating, Lily sleeping, Lily crying. Lily looked identical to Elena in build and hair color. There was also a document printed on thick cardstock, a legal non-disclosure agreement signed in blood-red ink. Below the signatures were dates, initials, and a single line of text. Silence is mandatory for survival. Elena's hands shook as she found a folder marked Elena, 2024. Inside was a script, not dialogue, not suggestions. A complete script for her entire life. What she should eat, when she should wake. A list titled Phrases to Induce Compliance. There were checkboxes next to each item, most of them already checked. She saw the document heading and her breath stopped. Program Elena, Stage 3, Total Isolation. Above her, on the floorboards of the main house, footsteps moved back and forth. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Elias was waiting. By 9 o'clock that evening, Elena was seated at the long mahogany dining table. She was wearing a black silk dress she had been forced to put on. 2 crystal wine glasses were filled with a dark red liquid that caught the candlelight. Elias sat across from her, cutting a steak with surgical precision. He moved the knife through the meat without effort, each motion deliberate and measured. Silverware clinked against porcelain. He pushed a small blue pill across the white tablecloth toward her. The candlelight flickered, creating long shadows that danced across his face. He stared at her with a look of absolute expectation. He tapped his finger on his glass, a slow, rhythmic sound. "For your nerves, darling," he said, his voice gentle but icy. "To help you forget the basement." Elena picked up the pill. She looked at him, then at the wine. She understood what the pill was. If she took it, she would disappear into herself. She would become something other than alive. She dropped the pill into her wine glass. It dissolved instantly with a tiny hiss, leaving purple swirls in the red liquid. Elias smiled. It was the first time he had looked satisfied. He raised his own glass. "To us," he said. He took a long drink, his throat moving as the wine went down. At 11 o'clock, Elena was trying to climb over the marble railing of the second-story balcony. Elias was behind her, stumbling. The pill was starting to affect him, but it had made him more aggressive, not less. His movements were loose and vicious, a drunken violence that was somehow more terrifying than his calculated control. Elena scrambled, her shoes discarded on the cool marble. The forest surrounding the estate was dark, the moonlight just barely illuminating the trees below. Wind whistled through the branches. Elias grabbed Elena's ankle just as she was about to jump. He pulled her back onto the balcony floor with a violent jerk. He started choking her, his hands like iron bands around her neck. Elena clawed at his face, drawing blood. She could taste copper in the air. Her vision began to blur at the edges. She reached for a heavy glass ashtray on the balcony table. She smashed it against the side of Elias's head. Glass shattered everywhere, falling like ice. He groaned, and his grip loosened. She hit him again. Blood and glass sprayed across the white marble, mixing with the moonlight. Elias fell back, his head hitting the wrought iron chair. He wasn't dead, but he was dazed and drugged. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are mine," he slurred, reaching out with one hand. His fingers failed to grasp her dress. Elena kicked him in the stomach one last time, then jumped from the balcony into the rose bushes below. She hit the ground hard, rolling through the thorns. Pain exploded through her body. Branches cracked and snapped. But she was moving. She was moving toward the gate. The massive iron estate gates appeared through the darkness, 10 feet high with sharp spikes. In the center was a glowing blue biometric scanner, handprint and retina recognition. Elena limped toward it, her clothes torn, her body covered in cuts and bruises. She pressed her palm against the scanner. A red light flashed. A computerized voice announced, flat and final. "Access denied. Administrator Elena is not authorized for exit without primary user Elias." She pounded on the scanner with her fist. "Please," she said, though she knew it was useless. "Please." Another line of red text appeared on the screen. "Error. Security Protocol Delta active." She looked back at the house on the hill. The lights were flickering. Every smart light was pulsing red, an alarm she didn't know existed. She was trapped. Trapped between the gate and the man who wouldn't let her go. "He thought of everything," she whispered, sliding down the iron gate to her knees. Her head fell forward into her hands. Then she saw it. A small concrete shed near the gates. The old manual override station. She had noticed it on her first day in the house, barely visible behind the landscaping. At that time, it had seemed like an artifact, irrelevant to the modern smart home that Elias had built around her. Elena broke the small glass window with a rock and climbed inside. The shed was musty and filled with cobwebs. There was an old phone line and a dusty computer monitor. Analog technology from a decade before. From before Elias had begun his digital construction of control. She found a keyboard and turned it on. The monitor flickered to life with painful slowness, the hard drive humming as it spun up. An old administrative portal appeared on the screen. Elena closed her eyes. She thought about the morning in the kitchen, the way Elias's hand moved to dismiss her, the precise rhythm of his movements. She had watched him so carefully for so long. She had learned his body like a language she didn't choose to learn, but had to. Every morning, when he entered his home office, he would tap on his desk. 3 short taps, then 1 long one. 3-3-3-1. She had counted the rhythm 1,000 times, listening for the variation that never came. Elena's fingers moved to the keyboard. She entered the PIN, 3331. The screen flickered. Text appeared. Administrative access granted. She typed, "Release all locks." The progress bar moved across the screen. 10%, 50%, 90%, 100%. A low electronic hum echoed through the shed. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of a magnetic lock disengaging. A soft click that sounded like freedom. Elias staggered toward the gate, a kitchen knife in one hand, blood on his forehead. He was moving slowly, the drug in his system making every step deliberate and difficult. He saw Elena standing by the open gate. A car was waiting, the delivery man's van, engine running, the man at the wheel looking terrified and resolved. Elena stood perfectly still. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. "Elena," Elias gasped, his voice desperate. "Come back. You won't survive out there." She didn't respond. Instead, she looked directly at him, and then she performed the same micro gesture he had used on her countless times. She looked at a spot of blood on his shirt, then slowly pushed the air away with her hand. A single, graceful arc of dismissal. She dismissed him without a word, the way he had dismissed her every morning with a downward tilt of his mouth. She stepped into the van and slammed the door. As the van pulled away, gravel spraying beneath the tires, she saw him drop the knife. He fell to his knees in the middle of the road, finally small and silenced. She didn't look back as the taillights faded into the distance. The van drove through the night, through empty streets and dark highways, until the sun began to rise somewhere to the east. By morning, Elena had left the delivery man at a hospital with instructions to call the police. She had left the address of the estate. She had left the filing cabinets full of evidence. And then she had driven on. 3 months later, Elena sat at a cafe by the ocean. She was wearing a colorful sundress. Her crushed hand had healed, though a faint scar remained on her wrist, a thin line of silver that caught the light. She was drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. Seagulls cried above the cafe. A waiter speaking French moved between the tables. Elena raised her coffee cup to her lips and drank. The coffee was warm and bitter and perfect. On the table, next to her newspaper, was a Polaroid photograph. In it, she stood alone in a field of tall grass, smiling at the camera. Someone else had taken the photo, a stranger at the train station who had asked if she wanted a picture before she left. On the back, someone had written in pen, "Found." Elena looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she picked it up and placed it carefully in her new passport, next to her new name. She closed the passport and set it on top of the newspaper. She finished her coffee. She stood up from the table. She walked toward the beach, her footsteps leaving prints in the sand. The waves continued their ancient rhythm. The sun continued its arc across the sky. Elena disappeared into the crowd of other people moving along the shore. No longer the invisible woman from the silent house, but simply one person among many, walking toward the horizon